Okay, so we got a question there coming in on the Instagram story Q&A, which basically asked the ratio between developing technical and tactical aspects of training, which to do first, which should come as a higher priority for beginners. So I think when you look at the start of training for somebody who hasn't trained before, I think to build a combat athlete, it's very important to have a combination of both. Now the question is, when do you start each one, and how much of each one to fully be efficient in terms of developing a combat athlete. If you look at some readings and interviews, etc., from Floyd Mayweather, one of the best combat athletes in the world ever, he does mention that before anything ever happened in his boxing training early on, that he really prided himself on learning defense before anything else, which to me would come under a more tactical approach. So for ourselves, we would adopt certain games which would teach distance, the ability to avoid any contact while also making contact yourself, such as tagging games, essentially what any combat sport is, hitting without getting hit. So I think that's very important early on to build that base. But of course, then the technical base also needs to be there. So to answer the question, I think the answer is it depends. A combination, I suppose, will be the way to look at it. I do think earlier on there is more emphasis on maybe a 50-50 ratio in terms of building efficiently. But as athletes develop and become more proficient, I think it will slightly lean towards a more tactical approach, especially at the higher level of combat. You can see that most athletes will have, after a few years, a generally good, solid base in terms of technical ability. So the real improvements and difference will come from any tactical differences in terms of how to employ those technical abilities and put them in the best possible position to become successful. With decision making coming in there big time in terms of tactical approach. So yeah, basically earlier on we'd be looking at close to a 50-50 split, especially focused on building a more defense base and knowledge of distance, etc., timing, those things where the technical aspect would come in. And then when you look at further down the line, the more developed athletes, they would be looking at a ratio higher in terms of tactical and maybe less technical ability. But again, like all questions, it will depend. Then the second question asks for some recommendations on patterns training or forms training. So I think there's probably not as many resources available in terms of this type of training compared to combat, in terms of sparring, boxing, and any other combat sports. But in terms of developing patterns, I think the biggest thing would be to look towards the technical aspects first. Of you need to gain an understanding of what is the correct way to do it, as in which level is correct, what are the correct stances, what is the correct transition, how do you get from movement A to B correctly. So a good way to develop that would be to look at some high level competitors maybe and compare your performance to those people, with the approach of, okay, am I doing this the same way? For example, am I creating the same backward motion as these athletes who seem to be successful? Am I creating the same transitions between movements, etc.? So I think fundamentally what you need to do to develop patterns is first understand what is needed to be at a high level? What is the requirement? What is a good pattern as such? Secondly, you need to see how this compares to your current performance. And third, you need to put that into place through action, which can only come really from constraints of some sort, as well as a mix with repetition, with some feedback. So putting those steps and feedback into actionable ways of developing is the key here, really, for developing patterns. As well, patterns is, in my opinion, relies a lot on genetics sometimes, and how you have your body coordinated and how you carry your body. So I think that, especially at a younger age, that this can be a big benefit to people in terms of body composition, and just general genetics and body types can have actually a big benefit in patterns. So thanks to those people who sent in some questions. We'll try to get to some more of them again in the next episode. If you have any questions, just send them in on any social media platform. So we're on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Send a question there. And of course, if you haven't already followed, get following us on those platforms, and check out the website www.TKDCoachacademy.com.